Come on in for the last time.
Don't sound so happy about that, Matt.
So listen, this is our very last time together, and we've always had something very creative and fun to put in the chat. And so tonight, I thought the finale and the farewell would be for all of you to take your phone or your laptops and show us what's in your refrigerator. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to do that.
I think that's a good idea.
I'd actually like to see what's in your medicine cabinet.
Here's my fridge.
Actually, if you can walk over to your bar. I'm kidding. Stop it. You guys are bad for me.
There's my bar.
Whoa. Yeah, Ted's in a van out somewhere out by the river.
There's my bedroom.
You're crazy. Hey, tonight is our last. Tonight is our last night, guys, together, and boy, it's going to be kind of fun. And I know it's been a long haul too. And so, first, I appreciate you guys hanging in there for 8 weeks. That's a long time to commit to something like this, a learning group. And so, I really appreciate. Hopefully, you feel like this was the investment of your time, and that you weren't just giving your time. And we're going to miss you guys. And of course, this isn't the end, really. It's the beginning, right? Because now we know each other. And if we see each other at church, throw something at me and then look the other way. I'm kidding. Don't do that. I'm kidding. But we'll see each other at church, and maybe our paths will cross in ministry. So it's not the end. It's just the beginning. And I want to remain available to you guys as I've done to the classes over the last 3 years. I still get participants just emailing back and forth, maybe asking questions about the Bible, maybe asking some apologetics questions, and they're dealing with faith with a friend who's far from God or doesn't believe in God, or maybe it's just a God question. And so all of us are available. You have our contacts, and we hope that in our relationship, this is the beginning, not the end, and that we all want to make ourselves available to you, and hope that this is a friendship going forward. And we want to partner with your spiritual growth, and that doesn't end. And so I'm thankful for you guys. Hey, so before we get going, do me a favor. And I missed 1 week. What? It's okay. You can look at the video. Since we've had some real fun things in our chat for the last 7 weeks now, I thought we'd end our time together by just putting one idea, truth, or lesson that you've learned about spiritual growth. I know we've only covered 3 out of the 4 of the topics, but so far, out of all the things we talked about, what's just one truth, idea, or lesson that's impacted you? And if you could write that in that box. One idea, maybe it's an idea you're practicing, or truth, or lesson. What's just one thing that has just kind of been a highlight? And we've covered a lot of territory, so but I thought we'd just have a time of just sharing that together as a group, and reading some of your statements as to how God is moving in your life. And so if you want to share anything. And if you haven't learned a darn thing, just say it. I'm kidding. Don't say it. One thing. I'm going to open up a window. I love that. Yeah, need for consistent community. Sure. Spiritual growth, not instant. Yeah, it takes time. Regular fellowship. Yeah. Yeah, we cannot grow in a vacuum. People mirror ourselves, right? Because we're all expert at excusing our behavior. And so we can't grow in a vacuum. God's intention was for us to be surrounded by these mirrors, these other believers that'll feed into our life. Prayer. See, I love that. Conversation with God. Yes. Regular fellowship. Sympathies. Whoa, someone wrote that down. Awesome. Sympathy is feeling bad for others. Empathy is feeling bad with others. Dang, that's good. Who said that? Glad you guys are taking some good notes. That's good. Anything else? All right, well, listen, y'all, this is it. So glad everyone showed up tonight too. Very excited to land this thing. Tonight, we're going to talk about giving, what it means to be generous towards God. And so I'm going to start sharing my screen here. There you go. So tonight's all about giving, which, believe it or not, for all the wrong reasons, has always been an awkward subject to talk about as Christians. And in fact, I've always thought it would be interesting if we could kind of visibly see a thought bubble above everyone's head in church when the offering plates came by. And what would be in those thought bubbles? Wouldn't that be great? I think we'd see in those thought bubbles a reflection of a handful of competing emotions, right? And conflicting emotions. Maybe in one, I feel guilty, or I feel happy, or I feel pressured, or I feel honored, or maybe I feel embarrassed, or I feel grateful. I feel torn, or maybe I feel privileged, or I feel worried. And if that's the case, if those are the kind of thoughts we'd see in people's thought bubbles above their head, it's an indication that we have really lost our way when it comes to what giving is all about. So tonight in our lesson, we're going to address 7 reasons why we give to God, why we're generous to God. And here's the first one. We give because it makes me like Jesus, right? Someone once said that we're most like God when we give. This is a God who gave his only son to die in our place, who took on our sin, right? But here's the catch. Giving needs to be descriptive of who we are, not just what we do. See, if it turns into a box that you check, then it's not going to be part of your character, right? You're not going to be like Jesus. And if you're thinking about giving is just offering on Sundays, then your idea about giving is small, because giving is a lifestyle. It's not the thing we do in the offering plate on Sunday. It's the way we live our lives. It's a spiritual value by which we live, right? We give our time, we give our love, we give our compassion, right? We give up on our way sometimes. We give up revenge. Sometimes we give up being right. Sometimes we give our possessions to help others, right? And when we talk about giving, you might be someone who's just overwhelmed with the practical needs around you, right? And in fact, you almost feel abused because you're the one always giving and giving and giving and giving. And here's what I want you to realize. Because when I talk about giving as a lifestyle, some of you are just feeling an overwhelming weight. Like, man, I can't do it all, right? There's too many needs around me, my friends, my family, my spouse. Here's what I want you to remember. And this is worth writing down. You don't have to fill everyone's cup. Just find ways to empty yours. That's so important. The expectation is not that you'll fill everyone's cup and meet everyone's need, but that you understand what you have to contribute and you find a way to empty your cup. That's going to keep you sane. And by the way, if you're in leadership in anywhere, then as a servant leader, your giving should define your leadership at work or at church or anywhere else. As a leader, you should always be asking the single question, how can I help? How can I help? If you're going to live a life like Jesus as a leader, then you have to decide whether you're going to be a hero or a helper. If you want to be on the top of a Wheaties box, have at it. But that's the only credit you'll get. But if you want to be the helper, the person who comes alongside someone and takes them to another level, adds value to their life, now you're being like Jesus because he gave. Let me give you a second reason we give. Giving draws me closer to the heart of God. You guys are all familiar with the verse Matthew 6:20-21, right? Where your treasure is, that which is important to you, there will your heart be also. That just seems logical, right? Um, uh, this money is the great teacher. Well, you got to write that down. Money is the great teacher because it's always going to say something about what's important to you. Money's a great teacher because it's always going to say something about what's important to you, right? Wherever you work, I got to believe that there's some way that you are encouraged to measure things, right? To see how you're doing. Sometimes we call them KPIs, key performance indicators. So whatever you're doing with your team or by yourself every 2 weeks or at the end of the month, you look at numbers, you look at results, you look at impact because you want to measure how you're doing. Jesus is giving us a spiritual and personal KPI, a spiritual, personal key performance indicator on our spirituality. Just look at where your money goes. It's a teacher. What's it saying about you? What's it saying about your personal values? All you have to do is follow the money trail. What do you spend your money on, right? One of the great exercises that I would suggest you do is really pay close inventory of all your spending just for 30 days. Mark everything down, right? We're used to just kind of, if it's small, we don't do it. No, mark everything down for 30 days just to get some type of analysis on where my money's going. Because wherever your money's going, there's your heart also. And we have a chance to grow close to God to make sure that our values are aligned with what God thinks is important. You know, I was just telling the team before we came on, my wife and I decided to do some vacationing in Colorado, and the hotel was kind of expensive, and I really had to think about, is this really where I want to spend my money? But I'm also thinking this is an investment in my marriage, and so I say yes. This is exactly where God would want me to spend my money, because my wife's important to God, and my marriage is important to God, and I want to make an investment there. Let me give you a third. Giving is the antidote to materialism. Giving is the antidote to materialism. Notice this verse. It's very interesting. In 1 Timothy 6, Paul writes, command those who are rich in this present world. Stop right there. Listen, never equate spirituality with poverty. Don't do that. Don't think I'm more like Jesus because I'm poor, or I'm more like Jesus because I don't have much. Those two do not equate, right? This idea that if you have nothing, or if you sell everything, you're truly spiritual, is not biblical. God blessed many, many people in the Bible with not just nice things, but a lot of things, right? Listen, if all the Christians decided to define spirituality by being poor and in need, then how can we be helpful to others? That doesn't make any sense. How can a church help a community? How can you help your friends or other family members? If all the people of faith are constantly in need because we're defining spirituality by poverty. Listen, the issue is never ever about how much money a person has. You can be a believer in love with God and have a lot. God has blessed you with a lot. The issue is never how much you have. The issue the Bible makes is always about character. Not your money, but your character. And your character is going to decide what you do with it, right? Now keep reading this verse. Well, you say, well, what kind of character? Well, it's going to pose 3 questions so you can do a checklist. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant. There's number 1. Hey, listen, if you got money, the question isn't, do you have too much? The question is, are you condescending to other people? See? Hey, listen, if you're rich, don't get on your high horse. Don't look down your nose at other people. Don't be arrogant. Check question number 1. Number 2, nor put if you're rich in this world, Do not be arrogant, nor put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but they put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for enjoyment. Second question, are you putting your hope in God? We all know that the more we have, the harder it is to be open-handed, right? The more we hoard, the more we think about it, and the tighter our grip is around it. And so what does Paul say here? Listen, if you got a lot of money, the money's not the problem. Where are you putting your hope? See, it's always going to come back to character. And here's the last check question if you got money. It says, command them to do good and be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. That way they lay up treasures for themselves, a foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of life as it truly is. Check question number 3. It's not how much money you have, but are you doing good for others? See, it's always about character. Are you condescending to others? Are you putting your hope in God? And are you doing good for others? That's the question we need to ask. Not, do we have too much money, right? And by the way, the things that creeps up on us when it comes to materialism is entitlement. Isn't that the case? It's entitlement. You know, according to economic economists, they say that about every 10 years or so, what Americans deem as essential changes, right? So if you ask the average American, hey, what do you think is absolutely necessary for you to exist? According to USA Today, in an article in 2019, the average adult now is spending $1,400 a month on non-essential things, about $18,000 a year. We just got to be careful. And we buy it, not necessarily because we can afford it, but we somehow think we're entitled to it. You got to watch that. If you're going to watch materialism in your life, then you got to watch this attitude of entitlement. I need that. And number 2, watch scorekeeping, right? When we ask the question, hey, when do I have enough? Listen, if it's about being envious of what someone else has, then it's never going to be enough. It's never going to be enough. And watch the time you spend on social media, y'all, because what you start doing is you start seeing other people's lifestyle, and the longer statistics show, the more time you spend on social media, the more stressed out you are, and the more unhappy you are with your life. Why? Because you're keeping score. Think about this. Think about, you know, we buy things that we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. We buy things that we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. Bam, we got to be careful about materialism. And there's a fourth reason. It strengthens my faith, doesn't it though, right? We're to be trusting the Lord with all our heart and not leaning on our own understanding. And we honor God with our resources and our wealth, our first fruits. And we trust that God's going to fill our barns, that he's going to take care of us, right? I mean, there's a real simple principle that we need to be cautious of. The more we have, the harder it is to trust God. Money's not the criminal or the culprit, right? That's not the problem. It's our ability to trust God more. That's why in Mark 10:25, Jesus said it's harder for a rich man to what? Enter the kingdom of God. Not impossible. It's just a massive distraction. Because once we get our wealth and our resources, we start putting our hands around it, and it begins. It gets really hard to trust God, but it will strengthen us. It'll increase our faith when we give and we say, God, I'm gonna give this away. I'm gonna be generous towards you and your causes, and I'm gonna trust that you're gonna take care of me. It's huge. I heard the funny joke. This hiker is out near hiking on a ridge, and he's pretty experienced, but he takes a fall, lands up rolling off a cliff, and he's now hanging on to a branch, and his feet are dangling thousands of feet. I mean, he's surely going to die if he lets go, and he has no one to help him. He's all by himself. He's dangling on a cliff by a branch, and this guy is not a very spiritual guy. He's an atheist, but you know what? He figures gosh, I'm gonna die if I don't get some help. And so he looks up into the heavens and he says, if there's a God, show yourself and help me. Nothing. He says it again. Now he's panicking. If there's a God, show yourself and help me. And you're not going to believe this. The clouds start parting and he starts seeing these shafts of light, and this thunderous voice comes out of heaven and says, there is a God. I'm here. Let go of the branch. And the guy thinks about it for a second. He looks down thousands of feet, looks back up into the heavens and says, is there anybody else up there? Hey, right. Hey, listen, God's going to ask you to let go, because that's how we grow and that's how we strengthen our faith. Let me give you a fifth reason. Giving is an investment in eternity. Giving is an investment in eternity. Listen, every single one of you want a return on your investment, right? Some of you, like myself, when you go buy a nice pair of jeans or a nice shirt or some nice clothing, you get what you pay for. So if you buy something cheap, guess what? You're going to get something cheap in return, right? But everything you spend money on, that's why some of you are picky about your tips. Because listen, if I spent money here and the service was terrible, I don't feel I got my money's worth in return, right? And so listen, when it comes to your giving, wouldn't you want the same? Wouldn't you want to know that if you give to God's purposes, if you're generous to God, that you're getting a good return for what you're getting? I mean, listen, when you give to God, it's much less about giving than it is investing, right? Than it is investing. That's what it's about, because you're going to get a return on that. Think about what lasts for eternity. There's only three things that last for eternity, that last forever: God, people, and truth. There's your investment. If you have the opportunity to invest your resources in God, people, and truth, man, you're going to get a high return on your investment. And you should. You expect a high return on investment in everything else you spend. You also should think that way when you give to God's purposes. And by the way, I don't know how this is all going to work, and this is maybe a discussion for another time. But listen, God's going to turn everything inverse in heaven. And the Bible talks about crowns and rewards in heaven. And I mean, listen, Jesus said the first is going to be last, and last will be first. I mean, everything in heaven is inverted. Everything we think is so important down there, he inverts in heaven. And I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, don't you? Giving is an investment in eternity. Here's the sixth reason. Giving blesses me in return. A generous man himself will be blessed. A generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. God will come to him who is generous. Now, remember, we talked about this in the Lord's Prayer. This isn't a get-rich scheme or strategy, right? The Bible is simply saying that God honors those who give. God honors your giving. That's what he's saying. And so when you talk about the blessings, this is an opportunity for us to be more aware of what God has done in our life, to reflect on that. It's so important. And listen, I'm like you. I come to God with a boatload of needs and sometimes complaints and fears and worries and anger, all that kind of stuff. And somehow Thanksgiving kind of makes its way to the end of the line. I remember going to my small group once, and we started our small group on Friday nights. Every night, we always kind of went around, did round robin, and we shared prayer requests. And we wrote those down and we took those home with us, and we all prayed for each other during the week. And I remember coming one Friday, and we're going around round robin just like we normally do. And it gets to me, and I said, well, tonight I just like to share something that I'm thankful for. And everyone looked at me Like, and they all kind of look at each other. And someone actually said, can we do that? Can we do that? And we all start kind of laughing. And the leader's like, I think we can. Because we just started defining prayer as requests. And but I'm telling you, we need to be thankful, and we need times in our prayer and with others to talk about what we're thankful for. Max Lucado, one of my favorite authors, tells the story of a farmer who grew discontent with his farm. And he griped about the lake on his property always needing to be stocked and managed, and how the hills curved the roads, forcing him to drive up and down. And his cows lumbered through the pasture, so he always had to put up fencing and feeding that needed to be done. And he thought, what a headache, right? So he decides to sell the place and move somewhere nice. And so he called a real estate agent and he made plans to list the farm. A few days later, the agent phoned wanting approval for the advertisement she was intending to place in the local newspaper. She read the ad to the farmer. It described a lovely farm in an ideal location, quiet and peaceful rolling hills, carpeted with soft meadows, nurtured by a fresh lake, blessed with well-bred livestock. And the farmer said, read that ad to me again. After hearing it a second time, he said, you know what? I've changed my mind. I'm not going to sell. I've been looking for a place like that all my life. You see, if we're discontent with what God's given us and we don't feel blessed, the problem probably isn't that we're not looking at it. It's what we're seeing. You see, you can get two people who look at something and they see something different. I hope you see the blessing of God in your life. And the last, giving gives me joy. Giving gives me joy. This is so good. It's funny. It's almost as if our hearts know what we were created to do. A while back, I finished a book on happiness by the same author, Max Lucado, and he talks about what makes people happy. And he actually cited a study that was done on donors, generous donors who gave to nonprofit causes. And these were just volunteers. And what they did is they actually did an MRI scan on these givers, these donors, these volunteers. And so when they had them under this MRI scan, they asked them to think about the ability to give a generous sum of their money to a cause they really believed in and were passionate about. Do you realize that when they looked at the MRI scans, the areas that were associated with pleasure, like sex and like eating your favorite foods, lit up like a Christmas tree? Can you believe that? It lit up. I mean, there was actual physical evidence to show that our brains were releasing dopamine, right? Which is just this natural chemical to suggest to your body, this is a good thing. And this is going to make you happy. That's just the way God created us. It's as if our hearts know what we were created to do. By the way, there's a guy who comes out with an article every single year. I can't remember what magazine it's in. It's called The Happiest Places on Earth, after the whole Disneyland thing. And what he does is he goes out and combs the country in all these cities, and he tries to find, by survey, the happiest people in communities. And it comes out every year. And he's got it down to about 10 factors that he finds common in the happiest communities in the country. And do you realize that one of the factors always that makes people the happiest in the country is that there's a high rate of volunteerism and giving? It could be at their church, it could be to a cancer cause, it could be like the Red Cross cause, it could be, but these people give of themselves. They give of their time, they give of their money. And you know what? It affirms what we were created to do. So good. Well, those are the 7 reasons to give. Now, let me just, can we get a little theological tonight as we kind of land this subject? Let me get a little theological, because there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to, well, how much should we give? Right? That's the golden question. Some of you are asking that right now. Matt, this is all good. I get it. I'm in, but how much does God want me to give? And often Christians talk about this idea of giving a tithe, right? And a tithe is basically Old English for tenth, which means 10%. That's where it comes from. I want you to understand that there's nowhere in the entire New Testament where Christians are instructed to give a tithe. Nothing wrong with 10%, but you just need to know that there's nowhere in the New Testament that tells you to give a tithe. You say, well, Matt, where did that come from? Well, the very first time in the entire Bible that someone gave a tenth or a tithe is in Genesis 14. A guy by the name of Abraham, without being instructed, right? This is all pre-Mosaic law, pre-Israel. This is just Abraham. He voluntarily gave a tenth to God. But he wasn't compelled or instructed to do it. He just did it. The second time it's recorded in the Bible is Jacob gave a tenth in Genesis 28 and verses 20 to 22. He gave a tenth. And again, no one told him to. God didn't ask him to. It was completely arbitrary. Now you say, well, Matt, why is a tithe or why is 10% really common in the Old Testament? Because tithing laws were a form of taxation to support the nation of Israel. You are a Christ follower. You are not a Hebrew living to support the nation of Israel. But that's where the tithe and taxation came along. You had to give a 10% of all of your income to support the Levite tribe, right? There was a kind of a priestly tithe that took care of kind of the pastors in the temple. They were the Levite priests. Well, they needed to be supported. And so in Numbers 18, everyone was commanded to give 10%. But that wasn't all. You also had a 10% worship tithe. You had to support all of the festivals and the ceremonies and the celebrations. And so in Deuteronomy 12, you were commanded to give a tenth, and that wasn't all. You were also commanded to give a welfare tithe for those who are needy. And so you had to give 10% every 3 years, right? Approximately a little over 3% every year. Well, guys, just right there, and there's more, that's 23%. So if you really like the tithe idea, don't give 10, give 23, right? But listen, the tithe was never intended for Christ followers. It was intended as a form of taxation to support Israel. So in the Old Testament, if you're looking at the chart, it was about the amount and it was about the percent. It was very specifically prescribed in the law of Moses in the Old Testament. However, when you look in the New Testament, everything is different. It's not about amount, it's about your attitude. And it's not about percent, it's about principle. And we'll talk about some of those principles in a minute. And by the way, in 2 Corinthians 8 through 9, 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9, 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9, it's the most that Paul has ever talked about giving anywhere in the New Testament. 2 complete chapters. You won't find a more thorough passage in all of the New Testament that talks about giving. And not once does he mention tithe. You know what he mentions? Principles. Principles that should drive your giving. Let me give you some of them. Give willingly. Give willingly, right? Listen, if you struggle with being open-handed, see yourself as a steward, not an owner. Right? Each one must give as he has decided in his own heart. Do you see 10% in there? No. In fact, he says it's up to you, not reluctantly or under compulsion. See, that's the principle there. Give willingly. You shouldn't be pressured, not reluctant, not under compulsion. No one's pressuring you to do this. You do it from your heart. That's the principle. Give willingly. You say, well, man, how do I get there? See yourself as a steward or a manager of all that you have, not as an owner. You know why? Guess who the owner is? It's God. Psalm 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Everything is God's. Now watch this. If you will see yourself as a manager or a steward and not an owner, you will be compelled by wisdom and never worry. Are you worried about all the things that you have or losing them? Start seeing yourself as a steward of what God's given you, not an owner. And you won't be compelled by worry anymore, but by wisdom. You say, well, Matt, what do you mean by wisdom? Let me explain. I go and borrow I'm going to do some Home Depot project and I need a truck to go pick up the materials. So I go and borrow your truck, right? Now, I'm going to be wise with it. You know why? It's not mine. I'm going to utilize it, but I'm never going to worry about giving it back. It's not mine. And so I don't, I'm careful how I drive because it's not mine, right? Again, I'm wise with how I use it, but I never worry about, oh my gosh, I got to give this truck back. And no, why? Because I'm a steward and a manager. I'm not the owner of it. I come to you and I say, hey, listen, I can't go to the Clipper game tonight. Here's 4 tickets. And you're like, oh man, that's awesome. And guess what? You get home and you find out you can't go. And you're like, oh man, I got to give these tickets away. The game's tomorrow. I got some fans, some basketball fans that would love to have these tickets, right? And so you call all your friends and find out who's available to go to pass them on, right? You are mindful and wise about who you give them to because you want someone who's really going to enjoy the game, right? But you're not worrying about letting the tickets go. You're not saying, oh man, I can't believe I have to. You know why? Because they weren't yours to begin with. I gave them to you. I gifted them to you. And because I gifted them to you, you're worried more about who you give it to and how you leverage it and how you use it, but you're not worried about letting the tickets go because you don't own it. You didn't own it. I did, and I gave them to you. And so when you start seeing everything that you have as a manager of what God's given you, not as an owner, you will be compelled by wisdom in wanting to make sure you're utilizing that resource strategically and wisely, but you won't worry about letting it go because it's not yours to begin with. Here's another principle the Bible talks about: give cheerfully, for God loves a cheerful giver. Isn't that great? In other words, it's never a have to, it's always a get to. When you give, it's always a get to, not a have to. I remember when my kids were smaller, my wife insisted, I raised 2 daughters who are older now and married, but my wife insisted that we always do Valentine's night together as a family because my wife wanted my daughters to see what it's like for a man to take care of them and to treat them right and to give them things. And on Valentine's Day, I did that and I rose to the occasion. And I had this little ceremony where we'd all dress up, go to a nice restaurant, and I presented them each with a gift. It was really awesome. I did it all the way until they were in college, until they got married. It was awesome. But you know what? Every time I handed them a gift, I said some really great things about them as a dad. Could you imagine going through that tradition and one Valentine's night, I finished giving them their present and saying nice things, and I get out my calendar and I check it off and I say to my family, can I go now? Can you imagine how, I mean, their hearts would drop. And it's not that the gifts and the words were any less of value, but I didn't do it cheerfully. I did it like a routine, like something on a checklist. God doesn't want that. God doesn't want that. When you give, he wants you to give cheerfully. It's a get to, not a have to. Let me give you another principle. Give sacrificially. Give sacrificially. 2 Corinthians 8 talks about this gift that this church was giving. They collected this offering. It says that they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means. Beyond their means. So I could give this, and they say, you know what? I'm going for it. I'm giving this on their own accord. See, no pressure. It was their choice, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. It's like the people at Calvary going, Pastor Sean, we beg you, take our money. It's crazy. Crazy Christians. I'm telling you, when we give sacrificially, it's meaningful to God. And that's different for everyone. See, it's not about the amount, because you can give a lot of money to God's causes and still not have it be sacrificial. But to someone else, it may be very much a sacrifice, right? And so it's relative to the person. So important. Let me give you the last one and we'll wrap it up. 2 more. Give expectantly. Give expectantly. I'm not a big I don't play the stocks, and I wish I knew more about those kind of investments, but my friends that do, and they're watching the market all the time. You know why? Because they're engaged. They're expecting something. They're invested there. Um, they're in the game. They have this high awareness, right? And you know, 2 Corinthians 9 says, "Whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountiful will reap bountiful." It's not saying if you give little you'll get little, and if you give a lot you'll get a lot back. That's not what it's saying. It's saying if you give a little, there's not a whole lot we can do with that in terms of fulfilling God's purposes at our church. But you know what? When someone gives a lot, guess what? We can do a lot. We can do a lot. But you start expecting God to move in response to your giving because of all the great things that you're empowering to happen. I love at Calvary when Sean O'Brien or any one of the pastoral staff come out and they give us a Calvary mission moment. They always do that, and it's intentional. Hey, we want to let you guys know what's going on in some of these ministries. It might be the children's ministries or the youth or the children's camp coming up that they do, or the special abilities ministries that we have, or the women's ministries. Why are they reporting out like that? Because they want you to connect your generous giving with what God's doing. They want you to know, hey, we're reaping bountifully in the things of God, and we're changing people's lives because of your giving. Let me give you one last one, and we'll go to our groups. I'm talking overtime here. Whoa. Give devotedly. Give devotedly. They urgently pleaded for us for the privilege of sharing in the service to the Lord's people. Oh, that's great. They pleaded with us for the privilege of giving. Give devotedly, something you're really committed to. You're in. You drink the Kool-Aid. You really believe that this honors God. I want to just close. One of my favorite passages in a Chuck Swindoll a book called "Improving Your Serve." He likens someone coming into a relationship with God like a seller who's trying to buy an expensive pearl, and so listen to this exchange between the buyer who wants to buy the pearl and the seller, and see if you can really relate it to you and God. I'd like to have this pearl, says says the man. How much is it? Well, the seller says, it's very expensive. Yeah, but how much? We ask. Well, a very large amount. Well, do you think I can buy it? The seller says, of course, anyone can buy it. But didn't you say it was expensive? Yes. Well, then how much is it? Everything you have, says the seller. We make up our minds. All right, I'll buy it, we say. Well, then how much do you have? The seller wants to know. Let's write it down. Well, I have $10,000 in the bank. Good, $10,000. What else? Well, that's all. That's all? Well, I have a few dollars in my pocket. The seller says, well, how much? We start digging. Well, let's see, 30, 40, 60, 80, 100, $120. That's fine, the seller says. What else do you have? Well, nothing, that's all. Well, where do you live? He's still probing. In my house. Yes, I have a house. Okay, the house too then. He writes that down. You mean I have to live in my camper? Oh, you have a camper? That too. Well, what else? Well, I'll have to sleep in my car. Oh, you have a car? 2 of them. Both become mine, both cars. What else? Well, you already have my money, my house, my camper, my cars. What more do you want? Are you alone in this world? No, I have a wife and 2 children. Oh, yes, then your wife and children too. What else? I have nothing else. I'm left alone now. Suddenly the seller exclaims, oh, I almost forgot. I want you too. Everything becomes mine. Wife, children, house, money, cars, and you too. Now listen, I will allow you to use all these things for the time being, but don't forget that they are mine, just as you are. And whenever I need them, you must give them up because I am the owner. Oh, what a great picture of what giving's all about. See, we're not really giving, we're investing, right? And we're really managers. We're just stewards of it because it wasn't ours to begin with. You start looking at things that way, it's going to change your life. And you'll find yourself being generous to God and his purposes and causes. Okay, I'm going to end our time, and I'm going to share a couple things at the very end of our discussion time. But I'm going to stop sharing so we can go into discussion. And if you could give us 20 minutes, Viv, that'd be great.
Okay.
I'll see you guys on the other side.